Yes, that's right. Backed by popular demand. Well, backed by a deafening silence that we took to be a reasonable demand that you were all just too polite to make. It's the inevitably nonsensical, yet hopefully enjoyable, After Movie Diner Season 2. If you enjoy the show and have pursued the recommended treatment from your medical providers, why not support the show on Patreon? Over at patreon.com/After Movie Diner. You can also donate to the show directly at aftermoviediner.com. Rate and review the show wherever podcasts are found, and rating and reviewing is possible. Even a 1-star review provides useful insights on exactly the sort of petty-minded and wretched individual who negatively reviews free entertainment they do not need to be consuming. So, without further dribbling, please put down your lemon meringues for the one, the only, John Cross.
That's right, I am John Cross, and today I almost certainly ate some sort of butter byproduct or shouted at a child for not understanding Kierkegaard properly, even though I don't really know who Kierkegaard was. Anyway, on this show, we are so happy to have returning to the casually mauve and most definitely weirdly sticky seats of the After Movie Diner. All I can say is that the previous person who sat there had a dachshund. Is a man who, in 2003, decided, just on a whim, to punch a resting elk, which resulted in the activity being turned into a national sporting event hosted by a former heroin addict who once had a series of repeated racist events on a cross-city bus before apologizing and finally getting validation from the public because he was photographed with Taylor Swift, and the other host, which was a life-sized cutout photograph of Ali Sheedy. Since then, our guest has given all his proceeds from this disastrous event, which nearly bankrupted the island nation of St. Kitts and Nevis, to a pack of wild ducks, which he then filmed and ironically uploaded onto YouTube. The video went viral and made our guest a millionaire overnight. He then lost all of his money in a Moxie Ponzi scheme and is hoping his presence on this show will open doors for him in regional British theatre. He is all ready and waiting for Pam Grier night down at the Sizzler. It's the one, it's the only, and definitely the only one, Matt Poirier. I think I got away with that one, okay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the staycation thing this week, Philadelphia. One of the things Philadelphia does really well is junk food or like food that's bad for you. And so, yeah today just got the Italian hoagie. I got a cheesesteak earlier in the week. I went to a fast food place. There's a Filipino fast food chain called Jollibee, and there's one way out like in the Northeast that I was like, oh, I'm gonna try this out, and I got like a burger and a chicken sandwich there. So I've been putting my body to some, I'm going to be 45 soon. I probably shouldn't be doing these kinds of weeks of just like bad food binges.
No, I think that's entirely what we should be doing. Right. Because it's often amazed me, especially in recent years, that as the world has burnt and is hell bent right. on destroying itself. You know what I mean? Like hell-bent on or the human race, I mean. The world that we inhabit. It's just hell-bent on just fucking destroying itself. It doesn't matter what we do or what we say or what we think or how we... Doesn't matter. People are just beset on war and sexual discrimination and violence and, climate change and everything else. It's hell-bent on destroying itself. It often maddens me then that the other thing that has proliferated during this time is, diet fads, health fads, etc. What are we looking thinner and healthier for, Matt? For what? For the apocalypse?
Right.
No. Yeah. I suppose if we're going to fight in a Mad Maxian style apocalypse, and it won't be for anything as frivolous as gas. It'll be for water and edible food.
Right, exactly.
And our lives, potentially. Just our lives. If we are fighting in that Mad Maxian type world, I suppose at that point that yes, we would need to be physically fit. But right. I don't know that if by the time I'm 55, let's say we've got another 11 good years on the planet, right? we might have another 50 good years. I don't know. I'm not being all doom and gloom. I'm just saying, if I get to 55 and they're going to expect me to be the warrior of the wasteland, I think they're sorely disappointed. You know what I mean? I'm the wastrel of the warrior land. That's what I am. I'm not the warrior of the wasteland. I'm the guy who sits in the corner and be like, has anyone found any more Twinkies? You know what I mean? Has anyone found any more pop chips? Because I could really just eat an entire bag of those. Or whatever, you know what I mean? So, are there any McDonald's that have not been ransacked yet? Because I'll take a 20-piece chicken nugget, please. You know what I mean? So I'm the wastrel of the warrior land. That's if this is, because it makes absolutely zero sense with the world the way it is, that everyone's like, but at the same time we've got to look fitter and healthier and sexier. Why? For whom? For what? For what future? Really? Seriously? You know what I'm saying, Matt? I think you get me.
I definitely do. I think the thing that gets because I definitely think in terms of the apocalypse. I mean, I don't. Unfortunately, Richard Norton is in his 70s now, and I don't know if there's going to be another Richard Norton out there or any sort of like fit Italian actors. Maybe there are some that we don't know about who are hanging out in Rome, tanning themselves with curly hair and like they're like ready to just don a leather vest and go out and save the world with
who keep hoping that one day Roger Corman's going to come back and make like one more movie. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
They're like, maybe I get to play Gladiator in one more movie from Roger Corman. You're like, I don't think that's happening, dude. But you know what I mean? Exactly. Have at it.
The other thing I've noticed with eating foods like this, like for example, when I got the cheesesteak on Wednesday, the place that I went to was about 2 miles away, and I walked out there thinking like, okay, I'll walk there, walk back, I'll work off the cheesesteak, it'll be good. It was a big, huge, massive one. The place was called Gooey Louie's, which is like
phenomenal name.
Yeah, exactly. And it was one of those places where they didn't even take the order right because I wanted like provolone cheese on the cheesesteak, and they were just like, no, you get the cheese we give you. They just gave the American. It was like, this is the cheese you get. I'm like, okay.
They're like, where do you think this is? This isn't the land of choice. This is Philly. Now, if you were anywhere else in America demanding your own type of cheese, they might accept that. But here in Philly, we give you whatever we've scraped out from underneath the hibachi grill or whatever.
Well, that's the thing, because most places in Philly, they do let you choose your cheese, because that's the way you're supposed to order. You're supposed to say, like, the cheese you want and whether you want onions. So provolone with onions or cheese whiz with onions or whatever.
Not Gooey Louie's, though.
Not Gooey Louie's, it's like you get American, that's all you get. And it's like, really, it's about the toppings. You want ketchup and stuff, which I don't want that kind of stuff. So
a melted orange square, because it's a square of orange. American cheese is not cheese.
Well, this is white. This is the white version. So they're a little bit on top. It's like a little bit classier.
It keeps ruining my bits. Keeps ruining my jokes.
Well, I wonder, like cheese. That's what it is like it's American, but it's like because there's two types of American. There's like the individually wrapped orange slice,
white or orange.
When Bourdain goes out to does the New Jersey episode of his show where he goes out to the Howard Johnsons that's like barely hanging on, and he's like trying to figure out what he can order that he knows is not going to kill him. He asks for a grilled cheese because he knows that the cheap Wonder Bread and the cheap processed American cheese are the two things that have probably lasted that aren't going to make him sick. So that's why he gets a grilled cheese and chips, because he knows it's like, so this place had the higher quality deli style American cheese.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's still, I mean, you're sitting outside in this area. There's like these kind of like these little like picnicky kind of areas. I didn't know this, but I chose the table that didn't have the ashtray. Because when I got up to throw my stuff, there's another one that had an ashtray, so you could smoke and eat. Just like
the glory of that, sir. Because if you're eating, that amount of meat and processed cheeses, the one thing you should also be doing is smoking. And I think that's the one thing I miss. Because I'm not a health chaser, but I have in my life quit smoking and quit soda. Those are the two things that I've kind of quit in my life. And I have to say, when eating fistfuls of greasy meats, the only companion to that is a cigarette. And I have to say, because there is something about human nature that once you've stepped, down the path towards debauchery and self-harm, it's almost like the next step is a slide, and then you're in the pool before you know it, right? There's no like dainty, stonework slabs or whatever. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes,
to like skip through the garden of self-harm. There's no like lily pads you can jump from to avoid falling into the pool of self-harm. Yeah. You take one step, you're then in the chute, and then splosh, you're out into the pool of self-harm. And while you're there, you may as well consume, heroin. I mean, that. You might as well go the whole hog because you've already put dangerous chemicals and meats in your body. So,
Right. Well, and the cigarette is like, it's one of those things like when you see the ashtray just sitting there, it's like almost like this mental thing of like, oh, just sitting there having a cigarette after consuming all of that. Yeah. It's like the perfect topper. Yes. It is like the maraschino cherry that you just plop down on top of that. Yes. It's like, yeah.
And the best thing about it is you can eat the maraschino cherry and still then have a cigarette. Exactly. You know what I mean? Yes. There is no end to when you can have a cigarette before the meal, after the meal. Right. I miss all of it, Matt. I hands down miss all of it. I'll never go back because my wife is first of all, for my own health, although that isn't a consideration. It's two things. A, it's my ego. Yeah. I quit and swore I would never do it again. So therefore, if I do it again, I'm letting myself down. And there's something about my ego that can't tolerate that. The other thing is my wife is rabidly anti-smoking. Yeah. And has never smoked. And I mean, comes from a smoking household, weirdly, but never smoked herself and everything like that. And I wouldn't want to let her down. So that's why I've never gone back, Matt. But and why I've found pleasure in the arms of the marijuana edible rather than in the arms of a nicotine-laced stick. But
the other thing to consider about the marijuana edible compared to the nicotine-laced stick used to be, right, that the nicotine-laced stick was a much more affordable option than the edible. Yes. But now, I mean, a pack of cigarettes is like $15. Right. A pack of Marlboros. It's like for twice that you get a whole container of edibles, and they're going to last you much longer than a pack of cigarettes. So that's the other piece. Because my wife, she did smoke before we met each other. I smoked too. I smoked in college. But luckily, because I started in college, it was easier to quit. Right. But she got bronchitis before we met, and that caused her to quit. And she said actually it was a kind of almost a social stigma because every place she worked, people smoked. Yeah. And they would get annoyed that she didn't go out and smoke with them or didn't need to, And also, it can also be a social stigma in certain job environments because the smokers all go out for a break, right? And the people who don't smoke and stay in and work, there's almost like a there was back when you used to be able to smoke and work in places like I can remember going to an office job and there being a smoking room you couldn't smoke in the office, right? I'm not like from the 1950s, but I was alive early enough or late enough or whatever you want to call it that I was an adult working in an office job and I could go 2 flights down and there was a smoking room in the building, and filled every day, filled from 9 to 5. Everyone would take their break, and then the next 20 smokers would come in and fill the room, and then the next, and so on and so forth. And it was remarkable because back when I was a smoker, the smoke in the air didn't bother me at all. Like I remember, I was still a smoker when I first moved to Vegas in 07, 08. And the hilarious thing was like walking into the casino didn't bother me. Like all the smokers with their big gulp cups full of change. A lot of the smokers, by the way, on oxygen. I'm not even kidding. Like a lot of the older ladies at the casino or men putting in with the big gulp cups full of change, greasy quarters into the machines, smoking with one hand and an oxygen tube up the nostril with a little canister by them. Horribly dangerous because that would ignite and kill them. But that was definitely a thing that I've seen in my life. People in wheelchairs smoking, all sorts of stuff. And I have to agree, there's a part of me that says, again, to do with the whole self-destructive thing, I've never understood it when someone, is horribly injured
and they get given, a prosthetic limb or something like that, that the next thing we see, they're running up a mountain or taking part in the Olympics or fucking, helping out at soup kitchens or whatever it is. Right. Suddenly they become incredibly, charitable and benevolent and wonderful and fit and healthy and everything like that. If I lost a leg, Matt, I don't know about you, but I'd be like, bring on the heroin, the cheesy, salty, sweet snacks, cigarettes, fucking everything. You'd see me at 9 p.m. in a Walmart parking lot in one of the mobility scooters swearing at a pigeon. That's what would happen if I lost a limb. I'd be like, that's it. Life is over, surely. All I get to do now is wheel myself around and scream at, birds of the air.
And for me, it would even be delivery. I don't even know if you'd just be like, I mean,
because you wouldn't even go out. You'd just be like, fuck it.
I look at Philadelphia. I don't know how I would get along with the mobility scooter in Philadelphia, because it's like people park. You know how like there's a little ramp on the sidewalk that you're supposed to kind of edge down to get into the crosswalk. People park on that.
Yes.
And so I don't even know how I would get around. I don't know. It's it's a mess. And so I would just have to sit at home and be like, all right, Grubhub, start.
Right. Oh, well, that's the other thing. Yes, you're right. I mean, I had this slightly melancholic yet romantic vision of me scooting my way around abandoned car parks late at night, sifting for gone off snacks around the back of the delivery bay or whatever. Saying like, if you've got any Cheetos that have gone bad, I'll take a whole box, whatever. All because I lost a limb. You know what I mean? Like I lost a limb and that's it. The only other option is I'd want, like, it'd be hilarious if I was just a complete wasteoid most of my life. And then at like 55 or something, lost a leg, and they gave me like the bedoing legs, like the like the Terminator 2 legs, where these amazing. I mean, they're amazing, Matt. I can't I'm so inspired by them, but at the same time, this would never be me. They're just the moment they get the bedoing legs, they're like, that's it. I'm running. I'm running the wall of China. You know what I mean? Like I'm gonna run the entirety of the Andes, and you're like, wait, you just got 2 fake legs. I know. And now I'm going to bedoing way all the way up to Mount Everest or something. And you're like, and then you become like the first guy with the bedoing legs to get to Everest, and they're giving you medals and shit. I'm like, there's no way on earth. I'd just be like, how do I get from here to my porch to get more snacks from the guy from Amazon who's going to deliver me more snacks?
Yeah. Well, the thing is with those human interest pieces, they almost always show them at the airport. Like when you're sitting at your gate and you got the TV up there, they're always showing either that or like somebody who has like a startup where they're making like jackfruit sandwiches or something like that. And it's like showing this woman with these 2 like hipster guys getting jackfruit from some Southeast Asian country.
Yes,
or
it's always like that. It's always or when they do. There's always one episode of Queer Eye. Me and the wife love Queer Eye on Netflix. There's always one episode where the person runs a small business, and the whole point of the episode is that Queer Eye comes in, puts them on Instagram, and suddenly they start making hundreds of thousands of dollars getting through their small business. And it's always, my mama was a prostitute and heroin addict and killed 3 men in a bar fight and, has only 1 limb and whatever it is. And her great-grandmother ran a barbecue shack for 20 years, which has been closed now for 40 years. But suddenly, she got some money from the, whoever hit her with the car, and she started up while she was high on smack, and just coming out of prison for the 8th time, she starts up the barbecue shack again, can't find any customers, and in swoops Queer Eye, and then suddenly, it's the biggest barbecue shack in Texas or Louisiana, wherever. It's always a story like that, right? It's always, and I always just like, I don't know, man. Like after my 3rd arrest and my 3rd bit in jail, hang me out to dry. I'm done. You know what I mean? Like, there's no way I'm suddenly like, no, I want to now inspire people and become a small business owner. There's none of that. There's like, no, I'm blocked on heroin and I've been in prison 3 times and I killed some people in a bar fight. It's probably best that you just lock me away somewhere in a chair with enough snacks. That's all I'm saying. I mean, I'm very inspired by these people. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm an empathetic, loving kind of pro happiness kind of person, but I also find anything that's inspirational deeply suspicious.
No, it's true because
so somehow and quite peculiarly, this then led to a conversation all about the film The Blind Side, which I didn't feel needed to be included in this episode. It didn't add anything. Let's just say. Then that sort of moved through into talking about Forrest Gump. Again, Forrest Gump didn't add anything to the conversation, but it does lead us to this next discussion about the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company and New York City and various other things, which I feel is worthy of inclusion because it's not just me rambling about mad theories about inspirational movies. All right, here we go. Back to the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company.
Yeah, I think that makes absolute sense. The only problem, right, of course, is that it begets the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company place, which it's like you go to Manhattan, and I still haven't been to the one in Manhattan. I need to check it out. Just
you don't need to check it at all.
I want to say I've gone there, but like I wonder, like eating by myself there, like because I'd probably be there.
That would be thoroughly depressing.
Yeah, yes, just like I'm gonna sit at the bar and open up some mail at 12 o'clock in Manhattan at the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company.
Yeah. No, I would never go. I've never been, and I would never go personally. It's not my thing. I didn't know when I saw that, and I didn't know because I'm obviously wasn't raised here. But I presume the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company came from the movie, and not that the movie created a fictional way to a fictional origin story for the chain restaurant. I assume the chain restaurant came after the movie.
It did, right? Or no? Was it? Yeah.
I've no idea. I've honestly no idea. And does Hanks get a little bit of buns from that? Then does he get a little kickback?
He might, but it is. I remember Anthony Bourdain did a really great episode. Bringing up Bourdain again.
You're a big Bourdain fan, clearly.
Right, exactly. He did a great episode of No Reservations called "Disappearing Manhattan," and he kind of pontificates because, of course, obviously he was from the Manhattan that was like, Times Square was just like prostitutes and sex, porn shop.
The good Times Square, yeah, right. the right
exactly.
Times Square, yeah.
Yeah, and he sees the Bubba Gump thing, and he's like, I just can't imagine how soul crushing it is for the wait staff working there.
Right.
Every time they hear somebody like spouting off different types of shrimp and like the guy's voice and or just saying "Run Forrest Run" or whatever like that. And it's one of those. And here in Philadelphia, they're talking about opening the basketball arena in downtown because currently it's down way in the south of the city where it's kind of away from everything. And I just imagine like all these chains just showing up because especially it abuts Chinatown where it's like, Chinatown, you have these restaurants that have like, culture, character, they're unique. And it's just like imagining like just, Bubba Gump Shrimp Company opening there because, everything around the arena becomes all touristy and stuff like that. It's, Times Square, it's one of those things. I've only been to Times Square a couple of times, but like one of the times Jen showed because we were switching trains at Penn Station, but the other time I was going to a Mets game and I had to get to the 7 train. And like walking through it as not a tourist, but seeing everybody just like wandering around Times Square, it was like, even though I'm not from New York, I had the feeling of being a New Yorker and having to get through there for whatever reason.
Oh yes, yeah.
It's scary. Like,
having been a New Yorker, yeah. I mean, it's odd because I definitely as a expat who has a big love of Americana and just landmarks and tourist locations in general. I do. I'm someone who I know a lot of people who are like, I went to New York, but I didn't go to any of the touristy locations. I wanted to see the real New York, and I'm like, well, at least 40% of the real New York is touristy locations. Like, it's not that big a city for you to be like, well, I went to the real New York. Really? Where's the real New York? What are you talking about? Did you go up to the Bronx? No. Did you go into like the middle of Harlem? No. So what do you mean about like the real New York? But you find these people, I found a little, authentic eatery down on the Lower East Side. Yeah, but there are no, like, what are you talking about? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I urinated on the sidewalk just outside where CBGB's used to be. Oh, well, okay, fine. The authentic New York. But those people need to be fucking shot into space or jettisoned off the island. I'm someone who, listen, I can tell you some great places to go to New York that tourists wouldn't go to, just I can do the same in London. But the difference between tourist locations in New York versus tourist locations in London is that, in general, tourist locations in London, I would suggest people go to them, but I wouldn't suggest anyone eat within a 5-mile radius of them. You know what I mean? Like, whereas, I don't know, if you go over to 8th Avenue or 9th Avenue to Hell's Kitchen, you can find some really decent restaurants a coffin a spit away from Times Square. But I would never eat in Times Square. However, I have a love-hate thing with Times Square because as a tourist, I kind of love it because it is this sort of weird monument to capitalism, consumerism, tourism, homelessness, and madness, like all just within a square mile. You know what I mean? And there's something like when they call it the crossroads of the world, there's sort of a romance to that. You know what I mean? I also love the idea that Disney came into a place and was like, can we paper over hypodermic needles, prostitution, death and whatever with, a Madame Tussauds and whatever. And they've just about managed it but what's nice to see is every so often you'll see some crime or some filth or some drugs or something like bubble up back into Times Square. And you're like, it doesn't matter what you paper over, this shit's going to keep coming. And I like that about it as well. But I'll also say this, as a New Yorker, yes, trying to get through Times Square at the height of any kind of daylight timing, I would, stay clear. Don't go anywhere near it. It's an absolute fucking nightmare. But Times Square at 2 in the morning, it's so much fun to walk through Times Square at 2 in the morning. That's the greatest thing you'll ever do. Walk along Times Square at 2 in the morning. It's just because it is. It's like a late night pleasure pit for like, you'll get like little kids running around Times Square at 2 in the morning, because adults don't care anymore. Adults are like, I take my kids all of the places. And I'm like, your kid is 3. It should either be in daycare or in school. And they're like, no, I take it to Times Square. But then, we stay up because I get it all hopped up on McDonald's and bullshit. And I have it running around Times Square at 3 in the morning or whatever. And I'm like, it's like people who bring babies onto planes. Because it's just massively irresponsible. We have no idea what the pressure of takeoff and anything else is doing to your baby's developmental brain or skull or any of that stuff. But to say nothing of the huge imposition you are causing every other passenger who's just trying to fly in a plane, which is miserable anyway. I mean, plane travel is just, at this point, the worst thing you could possibly do with yourself. To then be sat next to either a baby or someone carrying a yappy dog, which is another thing that I've seen on planes. Jesus Christ, have some fucking self-awareness, and if you must do that, drive. Don't get in a plane. I mean, it's just, it's irresponsible for the animal, it's irresponsible for the baby, and it's irresponsible to everyone else on the plane. It's because we've gone the other way now. We've gone away from the parents who just are like, fuck it, leave them at home, leave them with a child man, leave them with an older sibling. And by older sibling, we mean, well, if you're 8, the older sibling's 10, they'll figure it out. You know what I mean? We're not saying like, the older sibling is 16. It's like, but so that was it when we were kids. But now the opposite is true. Now parents are like, well, wait a minute. We want to continue. At no point did any parent give up, like sacrifice anything for their kid, right? Our parents didn't go, well, maybe we should be home more. They just went, well, fuck it, we'll just leave the kids home, right? And parents these days don't go, maybe we should be home more looking after the kids. They just take the kids everywhere, no matter what it is. Business meeting, casino, bar, gladiator fight, R-rated movie. Like, this is the other thing that in America drives me nuts, that you can take kids into an R-rated movie with supervision. No, that's not how that works. You know what I mean? You just no. Don't take kids into any movies other than like matinee screenings on a Thursday. Like,
that's the whole point of the R-rated thing, is that it's really supposed to be the parental thing. Right. It's supposed to be like, okay, my friends and I, when we were like 15, parents sign us in to see Terminator,
that's different. Yeah.
Something like Terminator 2, something like that. That's art. That's the whole point of it. It's not supposed to be that parents take their 2-year-old in to watch Arnold Schwarzenegger blowing up.
I remember parents taking basic babies and or toddlers in to see the Lord of the Rings franchise, and I'm like, first of all, those movies are 3.5 hours long. And no child, after about 5 minutes, that child is not paying any attention at all. But secondly, especially once you get into the second one, some of the action sequences and war sequences and whatever, they're just very noisy. It's not that they're violent, because whatever, kids, they don't fucking pay attention. But the noise causes kids to be like, oh shit, something mad is happening, and then that sets them off. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm not talking before people are like, well, John Cross of the After Movie Diner is stating that kids should be locked away in cages and beaten with sticks. I never said that, although that is a good alternative to taking them on a plane. Right. But have we thought about cages at airports that people simply deposit their children in? They go away for 2 weeks vacation to Cabo or wherever the fuck they're going, and then they come back and pick their kids up. In whatever form their children happen to be at that point. That could be an option. Just to answer an earlier question that came up, Tom Hanks does not own any of the Bubblegum Shrimp Company. The Bubblegum Shrimp Company did come about after the movie, so it's because of the movie, not that the movie referenced an already existing chain restaurant. The only connection that Tom Hanks has to Bubblegum Shrimp Company, apparently, is that in the Times Square location, we were just talking about Times Square, before the building was a shrimp lover's paradise. I don't know that the Bubblegum Shrimp Company is a shrimp lover's paradise. This is just on Google. The After Movie Diner does not endorse any statement made by Delish.com. But anyway, but he does have an interesting connection to the Times Square location. Before the building was a shrimp lover's paradise. That's still in debate. It was his first bank when he lived in New York City in 1979. So before it was a chain restaurant, it was a bank, and Tom Hanks banked there in 1979. That is the only connection he has, apparently, to the Bubblegum Shrimp Company. I have to say, Tom Hanks, Mr. Hanks, American sweetheart Hanks, America's cuddly uncle Hanks, he's the father of Chet Hanks? Tom Hanks, that guy, I think that's a mistake. He should have been given a bit of a kickback. After all, he is the Gump in Bubba Gump. Without him, so I think it's wrong that the Bubblegum Shrimp Company has never given any money to Mr. Hanks. Although Hanks has his own money, you know what I mean? It's not like Hanks.
It'd be great if there's an animatronic, Hanks, with the cap, waving, saying, hi, Lieutenant. Yes. Can you see all the tourists be like, oh, look at me, get my picture of this?
Right, and exactly. I mean, you, listen, get the likeness rights from Hanks, give him, throw him a few beans, and then get an animatronic Hanks at your restaurant. You're missing a trick, and we've solved why nobody goes into your restaurant anymore. That's how you get them back in. All right. As I have a hard out at 6 p.m. tonight, we are moving over to not only a double bill of Roger Corman and Pam Grier films, but also, and actually I didn't realize what a genius I was when I suggested the two movies. I simply pulled out two of my favorite of the Roger Corman Pam Grier collaborations, but it also happens to be two movies which also star Pam Grier and Margaret Markoff. Yeah. So there is a trilogy of connections between these two films that we're covering in this. And it's interesting because Pam did these Corman movies, which a lot of people assume were sort of the, she did a few and then went on to the blaxploitation, early 70s, Coffee, Foxy Brown, those kind of movies that people mostly know her and love her from. Not true. She did some Corman movies, then she did Coffee, then she went back to Black Mama, White Mama, then she came back and did Scream, Blackula Scream, then she went back and did The Arena. She was in and out of Corman movies pretty much for the first 6 or 7 years of her career. And even Coffey, the director of Coffey, is a Roger Corman collaborator, Jack Hill. So although Corman does not produce Coffey, it's definitely off the back of the Corman Association that Coffey happens. So yeah, we are talking early 70s, Pam Grier, double bills, Black Mama, White Mama, and The Arena. Matt, what are your histories with these two particular movies? Had you seen them before or anything? What was your past with this?
So I had seen, I've seen like Coffee, Friday Foster, I'd seen those ones before, Foxy Brown, but I hadn't seen The Arena or Black Mama, White Mama, but I wanted to. So essentially what kind of got me wanting to watch these movies was, recently there was that situation, the kind of the whole Madam Web thing.
Yes.
And every time about, and I was looking at it and I was like, it seemed like more of the female-led ones, it's like the people making those movies just were not doing a good job of making, the female-led, like whether it was that one, Elektra, Catwoman. And I was like, how hard is it to make a female-led action movie? And I was like, well, Pam Grier is the queen of action, of female action.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, a bunch of her 70s ones were on Tubi. And I was like, well, I should probably be catching up on some of the ones that I haven't seen before. And so, Black Mama, White Mama, and The Arena were two that was like, available on Tubi that I wanted to check out. And of course, they are kind of a blueprint for, both of these movies, I think, if Hollywood is looking to be making more, I don't necessarily think they need to do women in chains films, but the Marvels, that could have been a great intergalactic kind of
women
prison
in chains
escape.
Movie. Yeah, I think what you're trying to say, Matt, is that you think female-driven Marvel movies should have more topless scenes in the shower. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Well, Madam Web probably would have been a lot better off with more.
Right, exactly. No, I agree. No, I think that the Marvel female-driven movie thing, I think it's a little difficult because once they started to make like a concerted effort to make female-driven superheroes, and I'm not talking necessarily about Elektra because that was obviously sort of before the MCU, but once they started doing Captain Marvel or even the Black Widow prequel or whatever, is that a prequel or a sequel? I don't know what the Black Widow movie is.
Right, something in that range, yeah.
Because she'd already died in the regular timeline by that point, so I don't know. Spoilers for anyone who's not following the MCU. Black Widow dies in a way where she didn't need to, by the way.
Exactly.
Like in a way where it didn't make any sense. In a way where they could have pushed the Red Skull off the cliff and his could have been the soul that released the Soul Stone. Or they could have brought anyone from they could have broken a villain out of prison and brought him to the mountain and pushed him off the mountain. Or
they didn't even need that rule. They didn't even need to have that rule. It was a made-up rule that they made up.
Yeah,
and it's like if Scarlett Johansson said, I don't want to make these movies anymore, that's one thing, right? If she's like, write me out. After this one, I'm going to make my solo one, write me out, that's fine.
Right.
They could have found a better way probably to do it than like her noble sacrifice to let Hawkeye live. And
Hawkeye, who's not a good character, nobody cares. No offense, Jeremy Renner, but don't kill the only woman in the Avengers so that you can save yet another man. I'm not interested.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not interested.
So if that was the reason, if the reason was that Scarlett Johansson's like, I'm done. I think
totally. If she wanted just out, yeah.
Find a way to do it. Find a way to do it in a way that makes it so, that it's not, because again, it was a construct that they didn't need. But again, it's like that idea that that she has to die, so then they have to make like you said, a prequel version of her movie.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's.
And then they released it kind of in the pandemic or kind of after, so it's kind of buried there too.
Right.
But that was one I haven't seen it. I've been meaning to see it, but it has a lot of great elements because it's got Olga Kurylenko plays Taskmaster, which seems like that would be really cool to see. So it seems like it probably was a good one. It just it was buried.
It's the Marvel movie I've started probably 4 times and never been able to finish. And so, but my point is that the Iron Man driven first act, and I know they go phase 1, phase 2, phase whatever, but I'm saying the first act of the Marvel Cinematic Universe was, let's just say, the Iron Man, Tony Stark driven movies, right? Yeah. Which start with Iron Man and end with Avengers Endgame or whatever, and it goes from Tony Stark's creation of Iron Man to him dying, and that's it, right? Those movies were of a piece, and they were working towards something. They'd already decided who their central villain was going to be. They'd already decided which characters they were going to introduce. And had they done instead of just crowbarring Black Widow into Iron Man 2 in a very sort of inauspicious way to introduce her, had they done like Captain America First Avenger, had they done Marvel, had they done Black Widow, maybe a Black Widow and Hawkeye or whatever, like kind of origin story movie, when those other movies coming out, it would be talked about, I think, in the same terms as Thor and Captain America and Iron Man and whatever, the beloved MCU, because at that time they had a focus, they had a channel, they had good writers, there was a momentum building and there were things going on. And although there are movies that people debate like Thor 2 and Iron Man 3 that they don't think are as good, I love those two movies, by the way. I think they're actually better than their predecessors, but that's me. Although there are movies in that first run of Marvel that are considered lesser than, I think in general those 12 years of films are considered the piece. And I think the problem Marvel's had since then is finding out what that second act is, right? And I think initially they had made the second act Captain Marvel. They wanted Captain Marvel to be like the Tony Stark of like the second wave of Marvel movies. And the problem is by that point, all the good writers, directors, anyone that was doing anything had already jumped ship because they were already off the back of having been part of Marvel. They were then able to make their own films. They also didn't have a lot of female writers or directors in the first run of Marvel films. And so by the time Captain Marvel comes around and the Eternals and Black Widow and all these other movies, the core audience is not watching as much anymore. They're just not. And
older.
Not only are they not watching as much anymore, and I consider myself in that core audience. I watched religiously almost every single one of that first run of movies. And then once they started doing the second run, I watched enough of them to be like, I don't want to keep going with this. Yeah. However, again, another series that was absolutely panned and everyone hated it, She-Hulk, I loved. I thought She-Hulk was really great. So I still think I still think you need to get, and I'm not talking about the Greta Gerwigs of the world because I also find her like, frustratingly hipster and about as subtle as, a breeze block, or cinder block or whatever. She just did like, I don't want to go down a Barbie place, but like she's not subtle. You know what I mean? With what she's doing. But. I think maybe there's a world where, a strong female writer or a strong female director or a strong collaborator with a male director or whatever it is could produce a good female-driven superhero movie. I just think that by the time Marvel went, oh, all right, we'll make a few female-driven superhero movies, people were already burnt out on superhero movies. I think and that includes writers and directors, right? Yeah. So to go back to... I think that's the Marvel problem. To go back to these two movies as sort of examples of early female-empowered action films and sort of all the things that come with the sort of Corman B-movie school. And that is that both these films are based on films that have male counterparts, first of all. So neither film was, both films come from the Roger Corman idea of, well, we have Spartacus. What if we did Spartacus with tits? Now, I'm saying it in that language,
right?
Not because I'm not a feminist and not because I don't believe in female empowerment, because I do in both those ways 100%. But I'm saying it because from a Roger Corman mindset and from a financial standpoint in the 70s, that is exactly what someone thought. Someone went, what about Spartacus but with tits? Or with Black Mama, White Mama, what about the Defiant One? Is it Defiant Ones, right?
Defiant
with
Ones, yeah.
With Sidney Poitier and Tony Curtis, which is, again, a fantastic film. Certainly in case of the Defiant Ones, that movie is very much about race, and it's built into its setup and its elevator pitch, which is, what if a white man and a black man were, tied together and had to, make it out on the outside in, the racist America of today or whatever. And the interesting thing about the female versions of these, the Roger Corman versions of these, is actually the Pam Grier's race is not actually, part of it at all. It actually becomes purely about the fact that it's women. And what Roger Corman does, which I think absolves him from the what if it's Spartacus but with tits. Like, he knows tits sell, right? And I hate to break this to everyone, feminists and millennials and everyone else, tits sell. They still sell. Pornography on the internet, even though it's widely available and mostly free, is still a huge, huge, huge money earner, because 50% of the population of the planet love tits, right? Even gay men are fascinated by breasts. Maybe not in the same way as straight men, but they sell, right? So you can either go, well, I condemn Corman for that mindset, that B-movie mindset, or you can be like, well, I condemn the audiences that lapped up films like The Big Dollhouse, Women in Cages, Big Birdcage, etc. Or you can say, okay, that was a reality of the time, right? And it's actually a reality of today, but a reality of the time. It was also not done because you had casts of multiple women. It wasn't just like one woman and then like 50 guys. Because in these movies it was predominantly women. Whenever you hear any of them talk about being on set, the nude scenes were actually less of a problem, because instead of it being, a Basic Instinct type situation where it is one woman and the lascivious male gaze of, 20 men sweating and leaning over or whatever, it's a movie in which, several women are together filming this scene, and it is not as exploitative as it may look on screen. And so the benefit that Corman had was that while he was making exploitation pictures and he understood the market and he understood what he was trying to sell, the actual making of the movies, while not comfortable because they were like either in the Philippines or in Italy or whatever, they weren't in their backyard. It wasn't comfortable California or whatever. But there was a camaraderie on set. The women, as far as I'm aware, got on very well on set. A lot of those scenes were often supervised by women. And in fact, Pam Grier has stated repeatedly that her as a black woman showing her breasts was actually a sign of empowerment, because at the time, black women were not seen as the attractive norm in movies. And by her, saying, here are my nipples, and this is the color that they are, and this is the color that my breasts are, and this is my skin, and this is my female body, to her anyway, as an actress, this is her words, not my male interpretation of it. Her words were, I did that in my early movies because, to me, it was a way to get black female sexiness and black female nudity and black female attractiveness in the faces of the audience, for them to then one day be able to accept a black woman as attractive, a diverse audience being able to accept a black woman as attractive. Anyway, so that sort of tease up where it's coming from. They live in a complex world between a clearly very male-centric idea and a very empowered female cast. And these movies are often in conflict between those two things. But anyway, I just thought I'd sort of tee it up that way.
No, a couple of things to point off of that. I mean, one, like you talked about with Pam Grier, saying that she wanted to do these nude scenes. I think that also harkens back to Roger Corman not having Pam Grier's race be an integral part of the story, right? That, like, yes, in Arena, her character comes from Africa and she's sort of got an African history, but it's not like the fact that she's
but that
African.
Makes sense within Roman, Colosseum or whatever. Yeah,
exactly. But it's not like, like, oh, she's, like, right, like that element. So I think that part of it where it's like, okay, it's just women who are naked.
Right.
Like Pam Grier's like, well, yes, I am considered a beautiful woman amongst these other women. It's not just like a novelty that the black woman is naked, but rather we're all naked. So there's that one piece. The other thing I think people forget about the 70s is that sexuality and sex was it was a much more open period than what we're used to today, where back then, that for those actresses involved, if it is that kind of environment like you're describing, like we're talking about, it's considered much more freeing for them, and it's much more part of what they want to do. And I think that's one of the hard things, I think, for us, for viewers today, watching these movies today with the lens of growing up in the 80s and 90s, where things weren't quite the same as, and of course, granted, in the 80s and 90s, it was different because, we had AIDS and, you couldn't, free love was not something that you could have.
The 60s and 70s had both a cultural and also, sadly, a scientific backlash, which was AIDS being Reagan and Thatcher being the political conservative backlash of culture, but then sadly you also had sexually transmitted diseases beyond the sort of crabs or whatever of the jokingly named sailors' diseases that people used to get, that penicillin put a stop to. Now we had a far more serious thing, which obviously comes off the back of the 60s and 70s. So the culture collides with a very unfortunate, sad illness.
Yeah, but and I think with these movies, watching them with that lens of saying like, okay, in the 70s, sex on screen or, nudity, this kind of rawness, because there's a rawness to the nudity that when we get to, the nudity of the 90s or the 80s and 90s with the erotic thrillers, you've got, like whether it's the Sedaris films, which aren't erotic thrillers, but, Playboy models, or you get to the erotic thrillers like Shannon Tweed, they're very airbrushed. Yeah. They're very made up. There's a lot of they're very perfect. They're sculpted. The boobs
also
have been
because
done.
The nudity in those movies is about sex,
right?
Whereas the nudities in these movies, it's about sex and sexuality, but it's more about, well, as long as we have nudity, we can sell this movie. The nudity, though, in both movies tends to be like shower scenes or. Oh, they have to get dressed to go out and fight. Right. It's less we're going to stop the film and have a 8-minute sex scene with, like you've described in erotic thrillers, with amazing lighting and, billowing curtains and, soft focus and all the rest of it. And also there is no, like the women of the 70s, or certainly the women in these movies, are women. Like when you watch the films, you go, okay, that's a real woman undressing and showering and playing around and doing whatever. You don't. I hasten to call them. It's not to call them ugly would be completely wrong. What I mean to say is that they are natural and they are human. Meaning, they have wrinkles or stretch marks or, blemishes or whatever, which personally, my taste in women and sexuality, whatever, I like that. Like, I like real people. Like, and I always talk about, well, because there's a lot of people who don't. There's a lot of people who like a page 3 pinup or a Playboy pinup or a whatever, that's highly airbrushed and it's just... I look at them and I go, yes, that's okay, but I might as well be looking at a blow-up doll. Like, it's not... there's that fucking Kardashian advert for their Spanx brand or whatever it is, where it's just this weird clones, like Kardashian clones who are all in a spaceship wearing beige. And I'm like... I don't know. What are you trying to sell me? A hideous idea of the future where everyone is a beiged... Spanx wearing sex doll on legs, like
right.
I'm sorry, give me the 70s where people had different, like all the boobs are different sizes and different shapes, and nipples are different sizes and different shapes. And I hate to make that sound like it's fucking weird or rare, but it is these days.
Well, there's a realness, like there's a rawness and a naturalness to it that I think, one of the things, my wife and I have talked about this because we've seen, kind of studies that go with younger generations where they grew up with porn, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, for our generation, right, porn was like this thing that you were like, it was like a unique thing, right? We didn't
your
equate
stepfather
porn.
had it in a box under the bed, and if you found it, it was on VHS, and all of the genitals were brown because the VHS was sort of this weird faded pinky brown kind of color. It was weird.
Yeah, and we didn't equate that to real sex, right? Like we didn't equate that to what. No. But I think and whereas like millennials and younger, they expect when they have sex with like males expect when they have sex with a woman that I'm just gonna pull it out and just to be transgressive, you just whatever, come on her face or whatever you do, like whatever you do in a porn movie.
Right.
They expect that kind of thing. Right. I think for us in our generation, we grew up with sort of the airbrush thing in the 80s and 90s where we didn't equate porn to sex, but we equated like sort of the images of people as like, oh, this is what we expect. And then it's like,
right, this is what I expect from my cinematic sex.
Right.
But I'm not going to assume that when, my girlfriend or my wife or my one night stand takes off her dress or I take off her dress, that I'm suddenly going to be like, oh my God, it's this like
in a tweed
Barbie style, glossy, whatever. The whole, the interesting thing about true human sexuality is that smells and touch and skin and shape and all of that plays into it. It's not this. Yes, you can watch an image on a screen and become aroused. I'm not saying you can't. And that image can be airbrushed and well lit and whatever. But the idea that the people in these movies in the 70s were real women, very often real women who were, as I say, far from home in a foreign country or whatever, doing these scenes as, all having to band together and just suck it up and kind of do these scenes or whatever, because they understood that, but they understood the double edge of it, that you can play in a world that is potentially misogynistic. In other words, know that 30% of the people who are going to buy tickets to this movie are buying it because, I get to see boobs.
Right.
But also know that maybe, just maybe, the person who walks in and goes, I'm just here to see the boobs, might leave going, I want to see more movies where women wield swords and, like, fucking attack their male oppressors and whatever. Like The Arena. So if we start talking about the movie specifically, I know we're running. I can go to 6:15, but because we're already running out of time. But in Arena, which is the Gladiator version, the Gladiator movie, essentially it is that the Roman emperors suddenly decide one night, they go, well, what can we do to liven up the gladiator matches? How about we take some of these female slaves and make them gladiators? And it's all about how the women want to escape their oppressor, but they also know that they have to fight to the death, but women aren't going to, in the same way that men are just going to be like, yeah, I will fight for survival, women are going to be slightly more either horrified by that or more camaraderie between them, and therefore they figure out a way that through their sheer numbers, that they can be strong, powerful, and overthrow their oppressors. And then in the other movie, Black Mama, White Mama, it's far more just Pam and I said her name earlier and I've forgotten her name again now. Margaret Markov are tied together. There are three different groups of people chasing them, and it's through their intelligence, but also their endurance that they, make it out or don't make it out, depending. It's far less. There's far less message there than there is in The Arena. The Arena has a little bit more of a message in there, but like Corman says himself in the making of, I never wanted it to be on the surface. And I think that one of the reasons I personally love B-movies, and I've said this on the Diner many times, is that the best B-movies have message in them if you choose to find it. But they also have all of the exploitation fun that you could ever possibly want. And I think that the two things can live together in a far more successful way than what we have currently, where people are like, this is a movie for women, made by women, about feminism, that also happens to give millions and millions and millions of dollars to a giant corporation that makes a doll. Do you know what I mean? Whereas back then, it was like, well, we're making a script. There aren't many instances where Corman backed women. Most people you list who come out of the Corman school, as it's called, are men. It's De Palma, it's De Niro, it's Jack Nicholson, it's Scorsese, it's Joe Dante, it's Alan Arkush. I mean, you could keep listing it, right? Pam is the one incredibly famous woman who came out of the Corman school. Not only came out of this Corman school, but did multiple Corman movies. Did multiple movies with then like Jack Hill and other like Corman acolytes. But they are now known as Pam Grier movies. They're not known as Roger Corman movies. They're not known as Jack Hill movies. They are known squarely as Pam Grier movies. And that speaks to just her sheer power and charisma and sex appeal and intelligence as an actress, all of which shine through in all of these movies. No matter how dumb women in prison, exploitation movies, some of the ones she did, her character and her intelligence just shine through in every one.
Yeah, and I think the big thing with both of these, but I think the arena you hit on, which I think is one of those areas where kind of the modern sort of feminist movie wouldn't want to admit is a strength of this movie. But the thing about the arena is you've got the men who are these big gladiator fighters who just accept their fate, right? I've got to go out and get. Whereas you've got these two women in particular, in Pam Grier and Margaret Markoff's characters, who say, no, we don't accept this. We don't accept this situation here. We're going to defeat this. The other thing I really liked about this movie is that, you had all those sort of like Southern, like you think like Gone with the Wind, right? But, you have all these sort of Southern, like, I don't know, how romanticizing movies where they would, sort of paint it as like this beautiful picture. And one of the things you get like the sort of like the house slave, the person that was like kind of, attached to them. And I really liked in the arena how they did that with the Roman woman who was the woman who's of Roman descent, who's sort of like teaming up with the slave, the slave master within that group there. And again, using that imagery of something that we recognize. And I think that's kind of why Tarantino did that with, we had Samuel L. Jackson in Django Unchained, kind of, use that imagery as well. But, those are messages, like you said, that like, Corman wasn't out and out going like, I'm making fun of, these Southern romanticized movies that I grew, that were coming of, when I was coming of age in the 30s and 40s that were like, oh, we love the South, and look at this slave who's doing everything right, and being, like. I'm going to say something about that. We're going to say something about that in here, but it's not overt, right? It's like you kind of have to dig in and see it. And I think the same thing with like the message about the two women being the ones who are the ones that foment the change, who are the Spartacus of the movie. They're the strong ones. And there's never a point where, even though they're both captured in both films, they're both prisoners, there's not like a damsel in distress element. No. They're not waiting for men to save them. They're not being rescued by men. They're the ones that are rescuing the men in the case of the arena, but also in the case of Black Mama, White Mama, they're yes, Margaret Markoff's got her people that are, looking for her, but it's not like they come and save the day with her. No. They have to, it's up to Pam Grier and Margaret Markoff to find them, to reconnect with them and do it on their own. So I think that's another piece of it, is that, they're the stars of the movie. They're the sort of the action heroes. And I also like too that, you think of movies like Arena, the way that they're done nowadays, they're just not, it's always just more about like bringing out people and having them fight and having rich people watch on a TV screen or something like that. This, again, the other thing too I liked about it was that the slaves were the civilized people, right? Whereas like the Romans were the uncivilized. That's something you see with Fred Williamson's Westerns,
Right.
where it's like he and maybe D'Urville Martin are the only two African Americans in town, and the whites are the ones that are like, just completely uncivilized. And
Right.
it's them, and so a lot of, like you say, a lot of those kind of messages that Corman kind of puts in the films here. So it's like you've got boobs, you've got exploitation, but then you've got like real commentary in there as well.
Right, exactly. And I think that it's as I said, I'm very much not against. There's too many people out there right now who are against whatever they consider to be woke, right?
Right.
And someone like a Bill Maher has become insanely nauseating about this stuff. John Cleese, a comedy idol of mine, has also become insanely nauseating about this. Right. So I'm not doing that. Right. I'm really not doing that. I think I understand the overcorrection we're making. I understand the plea for more empathy and understanding and unity and diversity. I agree with all of those things 110%. The fact that it's 2024 and we're still talking about that is upsetting to me as someone who's, lived through this debate. I feel like 4 times now, or 5 times now. It's remarkable that this is still going on, and I praise the people who are just trying to make a better world. I really do, genuinely. However, there is something to be there. The one thing I would say that, and I will try and phrase this a little more eloquently than the Cleeses and the Mars of the world, who just are like, well, I don't understand why, blah, 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 this sort of nonsense. Or rather with Bill Maher, where he's just slouched in a chair, high off his tits, talking endlessly about stuff that no one cares about. I mean, that anyone watches that Club Random show, it is baffling. He has become, to me, he is now Bill O'Reilly. He's now... what's his name? Fucking Alex Jones. He's Tucker Carlson. Yeah, fucking. Bill Maher is just another one of those guys now, and the fact that he can't see it is weird to me, considering he used to rally against those guys. But I think there's something. What I would want to get back to is this idea of a reality. So, and what I mean by that is this. Yes, human beings should strive to be better. Yes, human beings should be perfectly okay with diversity and feminism and everything else. 100%. However, there is a reality that people like to watch movies to be entertained, or people like to watch movies to become aroused, or people like to watch movies to cathartically live through a situation they never get to live through, or that there are certain elements in movies that excite audiences. And they don't have to be elements that are in real life, but they are elements that excite movies. What Roger Corman did, and the reason why he's been a successful film producer for 100 years, or 80 years, or whatever it's been. It's been a long time that Roger Corman has been a successful producer. He knows at its core what either excites, thrills, or entertains audiences. There's also something that we need to say in 2024, and that is, it's okay to like exploitation movies. It's okay to watch a movie that has nudity and like the nudity. It's okay to watch a movie that has violence and like the violence. There's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you a racist or a sexist or whatever. That's where I would draw the line with some of the stuff, right? And when you go to the supermarket, when you go to a restaurant, when you go out into the world, when you're voting, when you're in a hospital, when you're existing in the real world, pro-feminism, pro-diversity, immigration, I only want a diverse, more caring, more empathetic, more female-driven, a better world. I do, genuinely. But when I watch movies, here's the best analogy I can come with. I'm massively anti-gun. Massively, massively, massively anti-gun. I can just about accept guns for people who have to hunt because they live on a farm and deer keep or foxes keep stealing their chickens or whatever it is. I can just about like, or you live where there's a lot of bears and you need to fire a shotgun to like get the bears to run away. I can just about go, okay, fine, you need a gun for that. But like beyond that, all other guns are stupid. But in movies, I fucking love guns. More guns in movies, the better, right? So, and it's the same with, because movies are there. One of the reasons I love movies is, like I say, you cathartically get to live out a situation you yourself would never get to live out, right? And hopefully, while you're living out that cathartic scenario, there is a positive message behind the cathartic scenario, right? Whether that is, you're right, we should save all the children from the mine run by the mad, crazy Indian warlord, right? In Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom. Or, we should be, like, the women should rise up and overthrow their male oppressors in the arena, or whatever it is. And so to take two male-driven movies and make female-driven movies from them, but in such a way that isn't like, oh, look what we did. We took a male-driven movie, we just put females in it, like the female Ghostbusters, for example, although I do like that movie, but for other reasons. Rather than just giving what is often seen, I think, by people as giving women sort of men's scraps. And being like, well, we've made an action movie, but it's a male action movie, but we've just put a woman in it. I think what I like about the arena, to your point, and Black Mama, White Mama, is that it's all unspoken. Is that we can sit here as men in 2024 and go, oh my God, the genius thing about arena is they don't sit down and just accept their fate like the dumb men gladiators, or even accept their fate and take the ego aggrandizing heroicism of being the best gladiator. You know what I mean? Like most male-driven action movies, it's like, he's the top fighter, the elite thing. He can do things other people can't do, blah, 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 blah. This is just a bunch of women sold into slavery, forced to take arms against each other. And, after one incident that they could not back away from legitimately, because it was literally an us or them situation, they decide no more. Like that was it. We don't, that in itself is such a powerful statement without ever having to be like, oh, did you see the powerful statement we just made? Right. Let's replay that powerful statement again and just talk to you about it, which is what every feminist movie does now. Again, if that's what movies need to do now in order to speak to the children of today, fine, have at it. I'm not anti-Barbie. Like, that's why Barbie was made. It was made for that generation and those children, and it wasn't made for me, and fantastic, hallelujah. I became a feminist without needing to have any of that stuff. I just had to realize that, women are actually phenomenal. So yeah, that's how I feel about that. And I just think that, and it'll all come back around because we overcorrect, and then it's always two steps forward, one step back. So it's fine, and it's not like much has changed. Looking at I watched all the Oscar movies recently, and yes, there was Barbie and there was Past Lives, which and Anatomy of a Fall, which starred women. And in the case of Barbie and Past Lives were made by women. But everything else was male-driven movies, and it was the typical crop of male-driven movies, to the point where even something like American Fiction, that I actually rather liked, American Fiction has Jeffrey Wright being mad that a female black author has written a very kind of like ghetto language or stereotypical ghetto language book. And it's played as ridiculous, like, oh, you're pregnant again, Shawanda, or whatever kind of thing in the scene. And I couldn't help that, as much as I loved Jeffrey Wright in the movie, I couldn't help thinking, what if it was the male black author who had written that awful ghetto slang book, and it was the female author that took umbrage at it, and we watched a female main character throughout that movie. I couldn't help every movie, like, they kept talking about like, oh, Maestro is the story of this love affair and this understanding woman and the blah, 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 blah. I couldn't help thinking I'd much rather a story about the woman then. Like,
yeah.
and I think this is what I don't understand about movies today is that they talk about diversity and they talk about diverse cast and they talk about female-driven movies and they talk about female-directed movies, but we still haven't found a place in Hollywood today that is anywhere even remotely near as liberated as even the 70s and 80s were. You look at some of the female-driven movies in the 80s and some of the female-driven movies in the 70s, we've really forgotten where we came from. We really have. And instead of building on those, we've dialed it back to this weird thing where you're like, well, it's kind of like a comic book movie because it's about a toy, but we've whipped a bunch of feminism in there. And you go, is this the best? Like, is this really the best we've got? Like, this is the movie that's going to make $1 billion? It's just, I don't know. It's just so depressing to me because it could have done so much more.
Yeah. I mean, I think as we're thinking about moving forward, and sort of, for Marvel's sake, what Marvel's thinking about, like, okay, what happened with the Marvels? And I watched the Marvels. I thought it was a pretty good movie. But I think, when you look at Pam Grier, whether it's you see like her comments on movies like these or just see what she says on Twitter, I mean, I feel like Disney should hire her and get her as a consultant whenever they're making a female-driven movie. Because these movies that she does in the 70s here, they should have been a template going forward. And I think, for you and me, I think growing up, these movies were on in the afternoon growing up as a kid. These were on Saturdays, Sunday afternoons. Plus, I had Wonder Woman as a TV show, was in reruns. So the idea, like when I started seeing Cynthia Rothrock movies, the idea that there was a female-led action movie wasn't absurd to me.
None of it's absurd. Yeah, so I agree completely. None of it seems... we shouldn't even talk about it in those terms. We only have to because that's how everyone else talks about things. But yeah.
And I think Pam Grier, when you hear her talk about these movies that she's made, I mean, I think you and I are in agreement that probably the best thing that Quentin Tarantino has ever done is the stuff in Jackie Brown with Pam Grier and Robert Forster. It's just absolutely amazing stuff. She could tell Marvel, DC, whoever, this is how you need to make this movie. Because this is how I would do these movies. This is how, when I would make these movies in the 70s, these are the things that I looked for, that I wanted my characters to have. Just because I got naked doesn't mean that my movie wasn't...
Right, and if anything, there was. I remember her coming to, I think it was Anne Hathaway's defense, because I think people were talking. I don't know whether it was Love and Other Drugs or it was some movie in which, or whether just the fact that Anne Hathaway had done nudity in sort of multiple films or whatever it was. Yeah. Someone was coming after Anne Hathaway. And I remember Pam Grier being like, back when we were making these films in the 70s, we never thought that by the year, 2015 or whatever, that nipples would be a problem. Like that nipples would be, a reason, and a reason to be outraged. And I think one of the sadder things is the fact that. Oh, I mean, okay. I didn't mention this in my sort of female-driven movies, but I suppose Poor Things, is this sort of female-driven movie. I had some issues with the sexual politics and the gender politics in Poor Things a little bit, because it was desperately a film that was trying to have its cake and eat it too, which is, again, that's totally fine. It was it also made its points a little bluntly for my taste. But again, there is an Oscar-winning movie. The lead actor won the Oscar. Emma Stone. Yeah. Emma Stone won the Oscar. It is an incredibly sexual movie, incredibly nudity-filled movie. And while I feel like there has been some discussion, I've not read, but I've read stories that use the sentence like, Emma Stone had to defend sex scenes or whatever. Yeah. Outside of something like that, and I think Poor Things has surprised some people, For me, actually, it was more that after the sort of first of all, the sex scenes in Poor Things, I liked how they were realistic. No one looked like they had a lot of makeup on. There was, Mark Ruffalo had butt crack hair and back hair, and Emma Stone wasn't like covered up with makeup or whatever. Like she had freckles and lines and whatever, like human bodies do. I hate to break this to people, but human bodies have blemishes and stuff. You don't get out of your teens without beauty spots or freckles or scratches or scars or stretch marks or whatever. And so I did applaud it for that. My only thing was, after about the third sex scene, I was like, I get it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I didn't need the next 8 sex scenes. But it was fine that it had. But I have to say, like, Poor Things is probably the closest we have in comparison, in the sense that, and hopefully maybe this leads, like, maybe Poor Things rather than Barbie. And it's very interesting to me that Poor Things won the awards more than Barbie did. I mean, Barbie won the money, but Poor Things won the awards. The reason why I'm gratified a little bit by that, and hopefully it pushes us into a more interesting realm. Although I'd like to see female directors doing it rather than a male European director doing it, is that Poor Things and Barbie have 101 things in common. Actually, they're very similar films. It's just Poor Things takes, to my way of thinking, a much more realistic, understandable, almost more feminine route to its messaging and to its meaning than Barbie did. Barbie took a very Hollywood direction, whereas Poor Things took more of what I would consider. Poor Things to me felt like a woman talking to me, whereas Barbie felt like just Hollywood talking to me. Does that make sense?
It definitely, for sure.
And so I'll definitely applaud Poor Things and say that, yes, that is, if that's where movies are going, or female-driven movies or female-produced movies or whatever it is, I'd much rather that than the Barbies of the world, in terms of feminism and whatever. And not just because there's nudity, but because there is nudity in such a way that I think speaks to women more than it speaks to men, which I think is important. But back to the point is that I don't think Pam Grier ever foresaw a world post-1975 where the sight of bare breasts or the sight of nipples or the sight of cleavage or the sight of the feminine form would be, untoward, or would be censored, or would be the conservative moral whatever would come down on it again. I think every generation feels like we're done with these conservative idiots, right? We're done with them. Like, we've shown them that our art and our culture and our music and our movies are popular. We've shown them that, black people can be leads in movies, women can be leads in movies, Asian people can be leads in movies. Like, we've shown them, right? Like, we don't have to keep having this conversation, right? But apparently we do, and I think that is the frustrating one. But I do wonder, like, when you watch Black Mama, White Mama, do Republicans watch that movie? If they ever watch that movie, probably not, because it has a black woman in it. But if they do watch it, do they side with Diaz? Are they like, I side with the businessman who's just trying to get his money back?
Right, or Sid Haig, who's helping out the cops, right?
Right, yeah. So they like, yes, great. I hope that the cop, Sid Haig, and the drug lord get their money back and arrest these women who are just wantonly running across the countryside, destroying things in their wake. And you're like, that's probably how they watch these movies. I have no idea.
I think the biggest point you make is that Pam Grier, she really thought she was. I mean, not thought. She was hoping or wanted these movies to be groundbreaking. She wanted to be kind of moving things forward, so that she was hoping that in 10 years' time, in 1985, there was a whole cadre of African-American women who were leads in big-budget films, and women were getting nude and naked, and it didn't matter. Men probably getting, everybody's getting, like she didn't probably expect 1985 to be what 1985 was. And, and I think one of the things we talk about with the term blaxploitation or exploitation of film, that exploitation term, Hollywood used that term in the 80s to say, well, Pam Grier, Richard Roundtree, whoever, you're Fred Williamson. you're just in exploitation stuff. You're not mainstream Hollywood. When Richard Roundtree should have been a leading man along the lines of like a Richard Gere.
Right. And I have to say, I think if there's, I think one of the reasons why the early 70s filmmaking did not then lead to a Hollywood revolution. Two reasons. A, because, as we all know, in 1975, 1976, Hollywood came back in and was like, thanks for making our studios lots of money, we're now going to put white people back in movies again. Right. So we know that happened, right?
Yeah.
But I think the other thing, and I think this is actually more detrimental, is that the diverse audience for those movies, not the white audience, I think the Tarantinos of the world who watched them when they were kids, or us who found them subsequently and have embraced them. We are predominantly white male audiences. And I hate to say that, but we seem to be.
Yeah.
Us talking about these films, as wonderful as it is, as much as I enjoy it, as much as I hope the listeners enjoy it, we're not changing anything or moving the needle or getting people to recognize this stuff. I think what is sad is that the diverse audiences that did enjoy these movies did not then carry these actors into the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. Very interesting, though, that rappers, people like Snoop Dogg and so on, and Ice-T and things did. Like Ice-T was in Fred Williamson movies, Snoop Dogg put Pam Grier in movies, etc., etc. The Wu-Tang Clan, when they started producing films, they put Pam Grier in the movies. A lot of that generation of black stars do, in their own way, pay homage or celebrate those actors. But when you think of the next big wave of African-American filmmaking, which is the end of the 80s into the 90s, what people would call kind of like the Spike Lee era, right? To this day, I've never heard any of those actors give any kind of props, kudos, representation. They're more likely to mention Poirier or Belafonte than they are Fred Williamson, Jim Brown, Pam Grier, and so on. Now, I know Samuel L. Jackson has been in a couple of like blaxploitation documentaries or making ofs. I know that he's obviously been in the Shaft franchise and therefore met Richard Roundtree and worked with Richard Roundtree. He's obviously met Pam Grier and worked with her and Jackie Brown. But in general, these movies are hidden. The revolution that these movies were, the sexual revolution that these movies were, the feminist revolution that these movies were, the action revolution that these movies were, whatever you want to tie to them, a lot of them have been dismissed, both by audiences at large and also by, unfortunately, a lot of sort of the black community as well. And especially weirdly and this is like what American fiction talks about to some extent. And I wish actually American fiction had gone deeper into this. There was actually a way that American fiction could have used either the 90s movies or the 70s movies as examples. Because I think just because a black author or a black filmmaker decides to make a movie about crime or violence or sex or whatever, it doesn't mean that they're saying, this is my entire culture. It's the same way that Scorsese makes movies about gangsters. He's trying to say, like, this is how we fucked up. This is what we shouldn't be doing. These are the areas that we have been put in, whether it's Italian Americans. Again, they were immigrants that were oppressed, attacked, were forced into a life of crime because America wasn't offering them anything else, and then etc. So those kind of stories, the Italian American stories, are very similar in a way, and a parallel could be made there. And American fiction should have done more to talk about it. But I've heard a lot of African-American intellectuals who do these sort of documentaries, on Netflix, or there was horror noir that came out on Shudder that was about black horror movies, and there was Is It Black Enough for You or whatever that was on Netflix. And both of them, and there's even one called, I think, it's either Badass Movies, like Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song or whatever, that came out just after the Jackie Brown era that has a lot of Tarantino in it, and a lot of black filmmakers or black intellectuals or black professors in these documentaries, when they're asked to talk about these films, they talk about them in such derogatory terms, and I really think it's so narrow-minded. I think our culture doesn't come from I think our culture doesn't change because of sweeping documentaries that are made incredibly straight-faced about slavery or about inner city gang violence or whatever. I actually think our culture, if it has any chance of changing, it is the it's the Samuel L. Jackson, it's the Denzel Washington, it's the fact that we have. Denzel Washington could play the equalizer, and at no point is it that he's a black assassin. He's just an action hero. And that's what Fred Williamson was trying to do 30 years, 40 years before that. It's not that I'm a black action hero. I'm just an action hero who happens to be black, and it's nice for a black audience to be able to see someone who's black kicking ass, taking names, and being an action hero. And actually, I think that genre film, without wanting to sound too highfalutin or pretentious about it, genre film is where we make our most strides, because it's literally a palatable thing we know audiences love. We know audiences like action and sex and violence and rock music and everything else. You can put anyone in those movies, women, black, Asian, doesn't matter. You can have diverse casts in those movies, and as long as you're blowing shit up and having sex with someone and, running away from the bad guy or whatever it is, people lap it up. And so this idea that diversity only belongs in movies with, heavy messages and stuff is a complete lie. And I think if these movies got their due, instead of people being embarrassed by them, or instead of black audiences shunning them because they're not as intellectual or whatever, I say fuck all that. I would love to see Spike Lee or Denzel Washington, someone who's still a prominent African-American voice in filmmaking, be like, you know what? I fucking love Slaughter. I fucking love Coffee. I fucking and not just as when I was a kid watching Pam Grier was like, it was great. I mean, as genuine art and a genuine cinema. Without wanting to sound too highfalutin.
The one person who I think fits that mold, who does that, I think Mario Van Peebles is one who, and unfortunately, he just never had the success that.
Right, he wasn't John Singleton or Spike Lee or whatever. Yeah.
But I think he was, because I think Pam Grier. The one thing I've always loved about Pam Grier, I know you got to run. Pam Grier, she never has been embarrassed of these movies.
No.
She never shies. She loves what she did in these movies. She's proud of what she did in these movies, and she should be proud of what she did in these movies. These are great. She did really great work in these. And I think every time I see some sort of clickbaity, best women action stars of all time, and she's not on the list, I cringe, and I just think this is,
Because the other thing we should say is that in Arena, the two women in it do all their own stunts with real weaponry as well.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think the only person that I would even put in Pam Grier's category is Michelle Yeoh. I mean, Cynthia Rothrock can be close there too, but Michelle Yeoh is probably the only other one that I would say, okay, Pam Grier, but Pam Grier was doing this stuff in the 70s when Michelle Yeoh was a kid. Michelle Yeoh was born, I think, 61, so I mean,
Pam Grier was going out to the Philippines, which at the time was like a war-torn country, full of disease, poverty, and whatever else. In fact, on Black Mama, White Mama, she got very sick and was in bed for almost 3 weeks with incredibly high fever. Yeah. But you see her in these movies in rough terrain, running around with no shoes, very often no pants on or no trousers or shorts or whatever. Very often, wrestling in muddy water and cold water and against rocks and, fighting in gladiator pits or whatever it is. Doing Coffee and Foxy Brown, it must have seemed like a luxury production comparatively. Because the Philippine movies, I mean, there is no glamour to them whatsoever, zero glamour. And there's a stark bravery to them. Just watching them as a well-versed film fanatic, you can see there's no stunt people, there's no crash mats, there's no cushioning on their costumes or anything like that. These guys were fighting, pulling hair out, punching each other, rolling around, wrestling, whatever, au natural. You know what I mean? And the fact again that this is not. Applauded. And I think, we've given Black Mama, White Mama, like we haven't given it a lot of attention. But I have to say, Black Mama, White Mama, it is a fantastic action romp. It's an action romp. It's a series of action scenes, but they're all done really well. There's a good central plot. You understand it. There isn't the message that there is in Arena. There isn't necessarily the gender or racial politics in it that there are in other movies, even movies like The Big Birdcage or whatever. But it's a good old romp. Like, it's just a great action romp with two women in the lead. And you can't get past how awesome that is, even today.
Yeah. And I think, too, to that point, I think, when you think about like The Messenger, that kind of thing. I mean, it's like, I think that's kind of what makes this movie so great is that, you've got like some really good pitched action sequences. You've got shootouts, you've got, and you've got really bad, real baddies in Vic Diaz and Sid Haig, who, and then of course the warden, in the prison as well.
The wardrobe Haig has, how did he get away with it? It's just phenomenal. That light blue shirt with the fringe, the brown fringe on it. Oh, incredible.
The cowboy boots. Yeah, it's just amazing. And so for those two women, to be amongst these bigger, these big personalities like Vic Diaz and Sid Haig, or for them to carry the movie the way that they do, like you said, doing all those action scenes, it's the kind of thing that I think if people are making action, female-led action movies, they should be looking at a movie like this and saying, like, okay, what did this movie do right? Well, okay, you have women in prison, but you don't have women who are damsels in distress, You've got women who are fighting their way out of every situation. Like when they come across the guy and they try to get him to, like, break their chains apart, and he tries to assault them, and they kill him. I mean, that's them as women, they're not waiting for someone to rescue them. They're the agents of their own either success or downfall.
And I also think it was a very wise move to get Eddie Romero working on this. I don't know if it's the first time he works with Corman, because I know he'd done like Beast of Blood Island trilogy and stuff, and I forget, is that a Corman or not? I don't know.
It's a good question.
And he'd done the Monster of Yellow Night or whatever. But Romero, for all his exploitation leanings, there is an artistry to his filmmaking. There really is. There's a thought process. There's an artistry. He's a great storyteller. He's a great cinematographer. And all of his movies are worth watching. But like, he takes something like this, which could have been a very sort of throwaway, yet another, women in prison kind of film. He takes this, and I can't quite explain what I mean, except that he just puts it in very real environments. Yeah. He shoots the hell out of it. I mean, it looks fantastic. If there was a cleaned up, 4K print of this, it would look really great. Yeah. There's some really great shots in it for such a cheap film. He also puts some humor in there. There's like a decent amount of humor in there. I never feel that he is like lascivious with his camera work. Very often, like when we're talking about like Verhoeven and stuff like that, very often when there is nudity in a Verhoeven movie, he's like, yes, there is nudity. Look at the nudity, yes. Whereas I don't feel that from Eddie Romero. I feel like he's a little more playful with it, which I think helps. For people who have enjoyed our conversation and want more, go find Mark Hartley's documentary, Machete Maidens Unleashed. It's fantastic, and there's a rich vein of Filipino filmmaking that is both like wildly irresponsible and dangerous, while also being a phenomenal breeding ground for directors, writers, actors, stunt performers, monster movies, action films, female-driven movies. I mean, it's just, once you get into like a vein of cinema, I always think of those like 70s Filipino films as like, it's like this vein of, it began at a certain year and ended at a certain year, and you can kind of consume all the films made from that time. And I love documentary. It's like the Mark Hartley also did Not Quite Hollywood, the Ozploitation one. And Ozploitation's another one where you go, okay, I want to watch all Australian films from like 1968 through to 1978, because it's just a good period of experimental cinema and artistry and action, and people should dive into it, definitely.
Yeah, and I think so just to your point, Beast of the Yellow Night, that was a Corman production. So
it was okay, yeah.
So but yeah, I think that's something that we often forget about these Filipino films, is that whether it's Romero or Cirio H. Santiago, or when they had the Italian directors come over like Bruno Mattei or Antonio Margheriti, they brought like this quality of directing to these movies. Like they were real artists as directors. And I mean, Albert Pion talked about Cirio Santiago as being someone, like he said he got his start editing trailers for Santiago films. So he kind of understood that artistry. It's an element to these things that I think we take for granted, that like with filmmaking today, with directors today, there's this whole auteur kind of thing, and you got to make a movie or something like that. These guys were like legit professionals, but also artists, and there is something about the way they crafted these movies that I think, again, going back to Black Mama, White Mama, with the like you said, it's not lascivious. The fact that they use the warden as the lens through which we're seeing the naked women like cleaning themselves and getting cleaned up, I thought was a really great touch there, and was really, really great that we see it now, of course, with the 80s sex romp with the teen males are doing that kind of thing. Doing it this way, like you said, it didn't make it as lascivious, right? It made it
because
kind of more real.
You then, it gives you a dimension to the warden, and it makes you judge the warden. It does not make you judge the women in the shower. You're not condemning, belittling, leering over, or anything the women in the shower.
Yeah.
You are intrigued by what the warden is doing. Yeah. And then you suddenly realize, oh, what a hypocritical, two-sided woman this warden is.
Right.
On one hand, she's attracted to these people and wants to bed them, and on the other hand, she's sort of vicious and violent and puts up with all the degradation they have to go through as female prisoners in this place. So I always love that kind of stuff, and actually it's often the wardens in these movies that that have a really interesting personality, or a really interesting side character that sort of comes to play later in the movie. And so, it's just a wonderful way to go, okay, how do we do a woman in the shower scene, but we actually make it intriguing for the audience rather than judgmental or belittling for the women in question. And I think, it's a wonderful way to set it up. But I also think that it's because these directors come from countries where genre film is not belittled.
Right, yes.
And even what blows my mind is, even with the recent like Marvel boom and Star Wars boom and all this stuff, we're still not calling them genre films.
Right, yes,
we call them Marvel movies or big blockbusters or whatever. We call them anything that is apparently palatable. Right. But if you call them action films or comedy films or whatever, people are like, no. Like that's Liam Neeson does action films. Robert Downey Jr. does Marvel movies. You're like,
right.
Well, all right. But you know what I mean? So, I think that there is a language there that denigrates these films that we need to get away from. Because I will take to my death the opinion that the best films that have ever been made on Earth anywhere are not sweeping epics in which people mumble 3 lines and stare out of windows and watch fields of wheat blowing in the wind and whatever. They are, dirty, grimy B-movies made in the toughest conditions, or horror movies, or genre films, or action films made in the toughest, weirdest conditions, but which reveal true art in them, and reveal true humanity in them, and reveal true messages in them. And I just don't know that Hollywood will ever get there. But thankfully we have, as I said, the documentaries like what Mark Hartley made, and he made 3 in a row. He made, and they're each less successful than the one before, but the best 2 he made were Not Quite Hollywood, about exploitation, and Machete Maidens Unleashed, about the Filipino movies, both of the 70s. I'd strongly, strongly recommend people watch those, because if you want to be like, I hear you, John, but how do I get into these movies, and how do I discover them, and how do I know who to watch and what not to watch, and blah, 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 blah. Those documentaries are a great place to start, because they are, I love documentaries like that, because I will watch them, I'll see a clip from a film I've never heard of, and I'll go, I want to watch The Mad Doctor of Blood Island. Like I want to find that movie and watch it, even if it's 2/3 of it is mad and I don't understand it, or it's weird, or it's bad, or it's whatever. Like there's enough in the clip and there's enough in what they talk about it that made me write it down. And that's why I've always liked documentaries on films or periods of film, even the ones I mentioned earlier, like horror noir and stuff. Listen, if you don't know that there are a huge, great seam of black horror movies, fucking watch horror noir, make a fucking list, and start watching those movies. You know what I mean? That's what I did.
Yeah, and I think for these, one thing, for people, especially in the States who get Tubi, just look up one of the movies we have here, and then click on Pam Grier and see all the movies that come up. Because a lot of her 70s stuff is on there right now, whether it's stuff that she did on her own, stuff that she did with Fred Williamson. All of these movies here are on there. And you can watch them, get a taste of them, and be like, okay, now it's time to go get the Blu-ray or get whatever, get the physical copy. So you've got, because, then you get like the behind the scenes stuff. But I mean, I think, like you said, those documentaries are another great way to do it. I mean, but this stuff here is like, it's like this treasure trove of just really great ideas and execution and performances that, like you said, is just sort of sitting there. That, like, we know it. There are plenty of people out there that recognize Pam Grier. I mean, she has tons of followers. I mean, if I post a Pam Grier thing, people will be like, oh yeah, I love Pam Grier. She's great. So people recognize who she is, but I don't think enough people, like, I think. There are no, like, I don't think the Marvel.
It's like when they do top 10 action stars and Sigourney Weaver is number one.
Right,
don't get me wrong. I like Sigourney Weaver in Aliens, and I get it, and I understand that, like, most adolescents in the 80s watched her in her underwear holding a large gun and went, oh yeah, there's a woman action star. But Sigourney Weaver is not a female action star. She was in some action films, but she is not a female action star in the way that Pam Grier, Cynthia Rothrock, Michelle Yeoh, and others, and even Michelle Rodriguez and others are,
Yeah. No, I think my last point, I think kind of just what you said. I think that, Pam Grier, I think, if we're trying to figure out, like, I think these movies gave me what I wanted, right? Like, this is the blueprint, or this tells you why, how could you make a Madam Web better? Right. Well, I mean, you could follow one of these movies here, and you could have done it. You could have had Sydney Sweeney and Dakota Johnson doing Black Mama, White Mama, or The Arena, or something like this, and people would have loved it. I think it would have been big. It would have been cohesive. It would have made sense. But Hollywood they're afraid of these movies for whatever reason, and I think. These are the blueprint for how to make.
Look at was it Thor: Blood and Thunder? That was basically a gladiator movie, or like a third of it was a gladiator movie, and then
Ragnarok,
Ragnarok, whatever the one was where he meets the Hulk on the space planet and fights him in a gladiator ring. Like, that's basically a B movie in a big Marvel movie. Like, that's basically what it is. So let's do more of that. I agree with you, Matt. Thank you ever so much for talking Pam Grier, Roger Corman, 70s awesome action female stuff with me today, man. We will do this again. Thanks so much. Always absolutely. A pleasure, and speak again soon.
Thanks, Sean. Talk to you soon. Have a good one.
All right,
bye.
Bye.
plenty of answers, but no one